So I have a lot of new people who have started subscribing to my channel, been asking some questions, and I usually talk about type, and that is still a big framework that I use for just about everything. Um, However, I do know that sometimes, when you understand the system and then you start like building on top of the system, it gets really hard for some people. So some people have asked that I explain the system a little more simply, and I am trying to do that. I'm trying to do that without continuing the biases that have come with it. And my way of doing that is by explaining the cognitive functions of type more so than types of people. I do think there's a broader way to look at type, um, and the functions in general. I guess for me, what I would say is that the functions, how I see them, is that they explain any system, like any system that can change, that has some type of homeostasis, but then can adapt to new types of input or stimulus or anything like that. And basically, I would kind of argue that, like, if you know the cognitive functions, you know all eight of them, at a very broad level, you could say, like, they are the mathematics of the social space. Um, they explain things that regular mathematics or physics don't necessarily explain. Um, and you can see them within the progression of any system or the evolution of any system. A lot of times when you look at early systems, you will see there are some missing functions, which is why those systems don't have as much agency. And then if they, as those systems develop and have technology basically placed into them, they become more agentic. And that's why a lot of my conversation kind of moves across a bunch of different spectrums, from technology to AI to business to people, because these are all different systems. And if we look at the evolution of each system, we can see that they don't operate today the way that they did historically. And I'm talking like 100 years ago, 500 years ago, 1,000 years ago. These systems were much more primitive, as a word that we could use. Like, um, and if depending on what you believe, how you are going to look at this system is going to be different for you. If you are like me, where I'm very spiritual, I call myself a Christian. I don't agree with everything the church says, but I do believe there was a person like Jesus, named Jesus, and I do believe there were other great people too, and that there are stories that have built the foundation for our society. There were actions that have built those foundations. They are the stories that have been passed down. But if you look at it a different way, you may see type differently than me. But at the same time, if you look at the world, you can see that things aren't static. Things are very dynamic. We can see that a lot of people, most people, like some type of homeostasis. Some people are trapped in an environment that they can't get out of, and they are looking to disrupt that homeostasis in some way. And then they move to a different system. And these are larger systems. And that individual has their own internal operating system, basically. It's a good way I like to think of it. Like, you have your internal operating system, and there are external operating systems that you interact with. It's kind of like an AI bot or an agent, It has its internal operating system within Claude or ChatGPT, right? And then they have to go out and go into other programs using like CRMs, basically. YouTube has this with vidIQ and things like that. And they have to learn how to interact with that system. But they're able to do it because functionally those systems have everything that the system has internally. And if not, then that internal system has to adapt, or the external system has to adapt. And this is kind of where you can kind of think of, when I criticize institutions, it's because I think those institutions realize a lot of this interplay. And they are trying to change the internal operating system of humans because they are guided by their external operations. Though they also have an internal operation, like what makes them operate the way they do. Why do the institutions do the specific things they do? Because they have an internal drive, I guess you could say. There's a lot of ways that people approach this: motivation, agenda, um, a purpose, a meaning. There is something that the institutions do, but we interact with them, and we can even get outside of interactions with institutions, and we can just talk about it through nature. The the fact that there is, um, when you walk outside, when you go outside, right? You go outside your house. There are differences between maybe what you get interested in and what somebody else gets interested in. Maybe one person likes the idea of running on the pavement, right? Another person maybe likes the idea of climbing a tree. Another person likes listening to the birds. It's because they have an internal operating system within them. That's how I would put that. Um, so that's what I'm explaining. Kind of, I'm explaining the functions that make up the operating system. So the idea is that there are systems. There are systems like, let's see, this I will show. So you have family systems. Within that, you are going to see a variety of cognitive functions. Um, you will see within organizations, they all will have these underlying cognitive functions that are operating. So that's what we're going to go over. I'm going to break down each function just throughout these systems. So you kind of see these patterns, like it just is a reality. From the cell to civilization, I kind of just see that civilizations are just a large scale system. It has the same functions within it, but like instead of the cells functioning within us, we are these cells functioning within the civilization, right? And that's why I'm saying this is mathematics for more of the social realm, like what mathematics doesn't cover for, and the fact that when interactions happen, or that we can't even, not that math couldn't cover for it, but that it is probably at such a small level, a micro level, that we need to be able to talk about it more intuitively. Like this is what's happening in the world that we actually experience, that anybody can kind of pick up through conversations with people and through learning and taking time to understand something differently than you would math. And it is more like holistic than it is analytical. That's the idea with cognitive functions. Because the truth is, like, being analytical is fun, but usually if you've been analytical, it's hard to share that with people. That's just a reality. Like people can't analyze things the same way you can. And even though this is analytical, once we apply it to a context, you see how it is a little bit more holistic. Um, that it really talks about like the phenomenon that is happening, um, and will allow you to kind of pick up a bunch of the pieces, not just going narrowly into the one idea that you have. It's going to allow you to kind of pick up variables of reality, not kind of excluding them and saying that like this will happen or that will happen. So just using this, I'm going to kind of go over the functions. I'm going to start. So Carl Jung came up with these functions. So I want to make sure that I am kind of aligning with him. I think he had the whole system. I don't think like, I think for where he was in history with the information that they had and the knowledge that they had, I do think that he had a very complete system for what he was doing. And I think, now we can use the system and apply it to a bunch of different places. Um, and you can apply it to your own life. That's the real thing, like your circumstance. So what Carl Jung said was that consciousness basically streams through us from the outside and comes inward. And if you think about that, like you can look at things. I can look at you. You can look at me. Well, I'm not looking at you, but I'm looking at my screen. I can look at the TV over there. I can look at the outside, the trees I have out there. And that's streaming into me. Then, you get a little bit more um, complex with this and say, you're taking in the voices of your parents. You are taking in the zeitgeist, and I should explain this. The zeitgeist means the spirit of the time. So you are getting to know the world that you live in from an early age. And you can see like how you use this throughout your whole life. You go to a new school. You go into a new job. You are learning a new skill. Um, Maybe you are trying to ground yourself, like just trying to understand the world that you are living in more. Sometimes people do this sometime in like their early 20s where they try to get a better understanding than what they have already gained through college or something else. But the idea that this function is always working with you. Even when you go into other functions, this function is always waiting. When there's a loud bang from somewhere, that function is going to pick it up. Now, what you do with that is going to depend on other functions. Um, so that is the starting point. That's what everybody kind of has to realize, that because you exist, consciousness is streaming into you. The world, out of all the stimulus of the world. And now we can take this to an AI system. This is basically how AIs train on information. They go out and they collect the information. And when they first start training, they can't organize it. They don't have patterns that they can organize it into. It's just they go onto a website, they scan the website, and this is what the words say. They follow that website down a track, and they keep getting more information. And then they start kind of ordering it. They organize it, right? And we could think of this almost as like introverted sensing. They are writing the story. They are writing the narrative. They are carrying the narrative with them. And they can access it after they're trained. They can begin accessing that memory that they have stored and begin using it. And it can change the way that they interact with you when you give them a prompt, right? So they went out into the world. AIs went on to the internet and collect all the data. Then they store that data. So now they have an interpretation of how the world works based on so this is where it gets a little complex. So try to follow along. If you are trying to follow along and you need me to clarify this, let me know. The information that they're getting from this SE and SI are intuitions of the past. They are intuitions that other people have come up with. They're all the connections, all of the directions that have accumulated from the past and are now being taught. This is what institutions do. When you look at how research is done, when you look at how businesses are built, like they try to pass on their narrative, the intuitive process that they had come up with of like, this is what we should establish, this is where this should be going, and things like that. So basically, we always like to connect the two, at least, so we like to connect these sensory functions to an intuitive function. The idea that if you are storing information, right, that you are learning, it is from somebody else who put that information out. And if you are, that information that is put out is basically a space of possibilities of things that you can learn, right? And maybe you learn mathematics, learning mathematics. Now there's a wider space of possibilities for you to learn. Just learning learning counting, right? That's almost like SE, but that's like as pure as it is. There is 1, 2, 3, 4. Then, you learn that, okay, what can I do with these numbers? So there's a wider possibility. So then you learn to add those numbers. Now you have a wider possibility of learning to subtract and multiply, just go through PEMDAS and learning more complexity of this. So through that SE, you are storing the data. All it is data. Hey, these numbers exist. What can I do with those numbers? Oh, okay. So now there's a realm of possibilities. And if you are going to do anything with it, you need a thinking function or a feeling function. Maybe you say, I don't like how numbers are counted, or maybe you say, this is what we could do with this. So you are within that realm of possibilities, right? So that is your extroverted intuition. That is the realm of possibilities. And then, like, say you get this good internalization of what could be done with numbers. Then you could say, okay, this is what we could do with numbers. We could begin calculating something specific, maybe human behavior. Maybe we could begin building engines. We can begin looking at how fuel combust. There's a 14.7 to 1 ratio. There's a lot of thinking that can be done, right? And the introverted intuition is that it's going to kind of compress all the possibilities and say, this is what should be done with it based on this is where the final functions really come in. It's extroverted judgment based on where the world is now. And also a goal of whether do we need to be effective or do we need to be harmonizing? And a lot of that is going to be based on the zeitgeist at the time. Are you in a position where being effective would move you forward or would it create problems? Or are you in a position where, hey, maybe you should try to, use more harmonizing energy to to direct this understanding that you have. And those are your extroverted judging functions of extroverted thinking and introverted feeling. And then when it gets to personality, we accept like there is a lot of complexity here. So we kind of try to organize the functions in a certain way to say, okay, this function may interplay with this function and it would look like that. Um, and this is the same thing we do. Like you can bring these functions to business. You can look at the function and say, okay, well, is this business, like in college, you kind of realize it's more of a harmonizing function. Where in business, you realize it's more of an extroverted thinking function, an effectiveness function. It's not thinking like business owners a lot of times aren't thinking about all of the societal effects, where in college, you kind of are pushed more to think about the effects of what that decision making will do. And you are looking at that through the trajectory. So you can see, through any evolution, you're going to collect the data and then you have to decide what to do with it. Deciding what to do with it is often the hard part. Deciding what it means, what does this data mean, is a hard part because you're going to go against somebody else's worldview, kind of. Kind of like when we look at the AI companies, they are deciding what to do with AI, right? And there's a lot of pushback from people because they are being more effective. They like to kind of project the harmony. That they like to project that they are trying to maintain harmony, but really they are trying to be effective. And a lot of people are giving a lot of pushback on that, right? So that's really my way of understanding this, because then you can understand why some people can be born into an environment where maybe because of the information they gathered and then their internal subjective self of, what they think and what they feel, how they assembled the possibilities, affected them, made them come up with this worldview of, hey, maybe I should do something outside of my tradition. Or, some people may say, hey, I agree with my traditions, I like them, and may follow along with them. And then, through this, they're going to continue. Like I said, SE and SI are always going to be with you. So they are, I would say, like, there is like a limitation of, for a lot of people, I see this, honestly, I see it with everybody. And like, that's why I don't like the type thing, because, the fact is, like, yeah, if you stay in that sensing position for a long time, probably through midlife, which was what Jung was really addressing a lot, was like midlife, a lot of people want to move on to something, but because they've never been told that they can use their intuition to find something that they like, they don't. And that's just a reality. Where if we can encourage people to start looking at life as like, okay, maybe you spend the beginning of your life doing certain things and accepting like, hey, maybe you're going to change one day. Maybe you're going to realize there's another way to approach your life. Maybe there's things that are really going to interest you. So maybe you have to get into that intuitive process of, hey, what could there be for me? And this is why I've been talking about Jordan Peterson a lot. I do think he did this. When I look at, like, what made somebody climb the ladder of academia and then go completely against it. It was his intuitive process from gathering all the sensory data, starting to disagree, like having his FI and TI saying like, no, that's not true, that's not good, then realizing the trajectory of the things that were being taught, and then saying, what is his intuitive role? Like, what would he have to do? Because he recognizes all of this. He's going to have to get fired. He's going to have to get his license taken away. He's going to have to go down some very deep spiritual paths that not everybody would go through. He's going to have to talk to religious leaders. And all of this is done after he's already spent a bunch of time just following the system that was already in place for him, right? And he did this later in life. Some people do this earlier in life. And I think that is what these cognitive functions are really explaining. I think a lot of people like to be like, oh, I'm this type or whatever. No, you probably show some traits that kind of remind people of introversion and judging, but you're not really that type. Though it is good to use. Like it's good to use because that is how you teach people this. You teach them, like, hey, right now, and actually, I just did this with an ISTJ, and now he's doing a bunch of FINE things. He's enjoying his life. He's getting into all these possibilities. He just went on a trip. randomly to Mexico and went and did a bunch of things on motorcycles and stuff. And I was like, yeah, good. Like, this is what I've been telling you to do for years, because a lot of our conversation is like, oh, my parents told me this, or my parents told me that, or this person told me that. And I was like, okay, so you're going to live that person's life forever. And this, because he's an ISTJ, that's what it looked like. And I started telling him, maybe you should get out and go do something that you want to do. Maybe you should go explore the world a little bit more. You haven't really, other than the fact that you moved from one state to another, you haven't really gone and explored anything. Maybe you need to get into that extroverted intuitive process. Maybe that's why you're feeling like your life isn't going where you want it to go. And he did it. And now he's enjoying his life more. I mean, I see him, he's posting on social media again. You could tell he's changing. And that's the thing, you can change. Um, and I think society doesn't want to tell people that, or they don't want to make it seem like it can be a sudden big change, but it really can be. And it's really, really important that we acknowledge that and we teach people that from a very young age. Like, teach kids, maybe the school system isn't for you. Maybe you're right. Maybe, um, maybe sitting at church all day for an hour, whatever, however you do it. Some people go for like a whole morning. Maybe that isn't right for you. Maybe you just need to go explore the world more until you decide what is right for you, kind of. And then, like, I also have my own biases on this. Like, the fact is, I do think that it is good to have some type of structure. I think that if we could teach this to parents, that we could allow them to like find like the minimum structure that is needed for a child and then allow for more possibilities to happen. I think that's a really good way of, you know, not even allow, but you kind of have to teach people to like change their perspective, change their perception, look at things a little bit differently than they have previously. Like, yeah, maybe a child grows up in a working class family and they realize like the importance of hard work. Well, also as a parent, maybe it's important that you teach your kid the importance of recovering after that hard work, enjoying the benefits of doing that hard work. Um, you know, some type of everybody does come to this point. And the idea is that getting into your intuition is what is going to allow you to change. Um, I don't think the other functions really allow you to change. I think SE allows you to adapt, but it's adapting to what you have already internalized, even if it's unconscious, like um, how you are going to behave when somebody disrespects you or something like that, how you would act playing a sport, how you would go about doing something. And this is nothing about SE being like, if you are SE, like keep doing that. You will see the intuition come up one day. A lot of SE ends up just, recreating what it's done for a long time, but in its own way. And that's like individuation. That's all individuation is. A lot of people make it more complex than it needs to be. And there is complexity that comes into it. I'm going to just show you guys what I mean about the functions across all systems. From the cell to the family to industries and you as an individual. That is what I am going to just show you guys. Let me pull this up. And another thing is I reached out to that Paul P.F. Jung guy, the guy who talks about mimetic warfare, and which I think runs parallel to a lot of what I am talking about here. And I'm gonna interview him. It's gonna be a good. The kid system is really good. And I want to see where this fits into it because I do see the same thing. The idea that the manifestations of different archetypes show up on both sides of like the political spectrum and education. It may look a little bit different, but the idea that like there's intellectual warfare and then there's like physical warfare, and they are the same thing at a different scale in a way. And that's kind of something I was just going to try to show people. I think understanding this really would help people understand like when things are going on in the social structure, especially conflict. And I really started to think about this in a sociology class, which is why I reached out to P.F. Jung. He was a gender studies major, where I'm a psych major. But one thing they really teach you in social science is that, like, from a sociological standpoint, there are two viewpoints of analyzing a phenomenon. And like one is that you could take a functionalist perspective, the idea that everything that happens has a function or a dysfunction. And then you could be a conflict theorist, the idea that the only way to create change in the world is to create conflict. And this is what's taught in colleges. So like when you wonder why there's so much conflict and things like that on college campuses, that is why they are teaching college students, hey, if you want to change something, you need to create conflict, violence, and that's the only way to change things. Um, so when I say it's like there is like real warfare going on there, it is the same warfare that is going on in the military. It's the same indoctrination. They just have a different approach of doing it. And I think the functions will allow you to see what's happening, especially if you understand the contextual aspects of it, of like what's happened over time, like how an institution like a college has changed from the 1900s to the 2000s. So yeah, let me just show you guys this. So there's nothing really to go over, but it just shows you that like the functions can be applied everywhere. Um, there's that. Hmm. So what this shows is that like from the cell, all these functions are operating. From the nucleus is making decisions when um, material comes through the cell membrane. There are there are pieces that are doing introverted sensing, which is the same job over and over, bringing them to the nucleus. And the DNA in the nucleus may say, hey, we're going to change the behavior of this cell because of the information that is coming in. And when you look at that, that could be like an intuitive and a thinking process telling the sensing functions of what to do, how to act, and things like that. Then we kind of, most people who watch my channel kind of have, I think, a good idea of what it looks like in a person. Um, then you have like the family, which like a lot of this is trying to be as being like taken away societally, where like they're trying to take the family away from the center, which is why you see a lot of roles that aren't being filled because people don't know how to fill them, when it's just like that there's a reason Jung said not to like forget the archetypes, and a lot of the family role is an archetypal role. Um, and you can see like there is a head of the household, like the TE. Um, you would hope that like at least one parent is directing the projection, like where that family is going, right? And then the ideal was always that you had the father doing that and the mother who was creating the harmony within the family. Um, so there was some type of ideal there, and you can see this play out. You can see mothers and fathers argue about like, oh, you should be nicer to your son, and like father saying, oh no, we should be more strict. And that interplay was always just a very important thing in any system. And it's what happens in our body with our cells. Our cells are basically communicating very similarly. Um, and then organizations are the same thing. And now with organizations, you see like entire departments. Like you have the CEO who is your TE, right? But then you have HR who is your FE, right? And then you have the people who are working directly with your FE and TE, right? I guess king and queen energy kind of. You have people working with that who are doing the TI and the FI, right? Like, hey, who should FE really consider? How should TE think of this, right? Which is why Jung did say TE and TI do rely on each other. TI is going to critique TE a lot, but if they can articulate themselves well, they're going to get TE to start taking it on. And actually, what we really see in colleges is that a lot of TE has taken on FE. Um, that is what is happening in colleges. That's why colleges aren't so much about merit. It's about how much can you harmonize in a college. And that is the reality. But let me think. So we have, and then, so like those are your organizations, or all organizations know they have to have like an SI thing, like a real, like the foundation. Like these are the people who hold our company together. They do all the processes that we do on a day-to-day basis, while the CEO is not doing those processes. They're engaging more with the external world, right? And when they're engaging with the external world, um, they are creating the projection forward, which will be delivered to everybody who is working below them. And I know people like, it seems like hierarchy, but hopefully that TE was at one point SE, That would be the ideal hope. Um, that like the people like in these organizations who make it to TE were doing the work before and have internalized those systems so much that they can improve them without actually doing the work anymore, right? That would be the idea. Which is why this isn't biased, which is why you can't just stay a type your whole life. Just saying. I know people have asked me to clarify this, but like, think about it. It's a reality. Like, you could stay a type your whole life. You would not be, you would not be made whole. You would not be fulfilled. And the truth is, there's probably a point where it is very hard to correct for that, which is why we have to start promoting people to make the changes in their life, to follow their intuition and things like that. Because the fact is, at the highest level, there are people who would rather you not change because it allows their system to stay stable for a much longer time. So that's kind of my whole point with all of this. And I'm trying to explain it in a way that makes sense to like anyone based on just things that you probably learned in grade school, that you've experienced in any part of your own life. Um, but yeah, that's what I have right now.